You know, you were alarmed by this from the very start, from the first moments on January 6th when this started to unfold. You've cut a lonely path in your party. Have you been surprised by anything you found over the last year?
Well, I've certainly been surprised by many things. I think that in the piece that you played by Jon Karl just a few moments ago, he touched on the fact that we know now, we are learning much more about what former President Trump was doing while the violent assault was underway. The committee has firsthand testimony now that he was sitting in the dining room next to the Oval Office watching the attack on television as the assault on the Capitol occurred. We know, as you know well, that the briefing room at the White House is just a mere few steps from the Oval Office. The president could have at any moment walked those very few steps into the briefing room, gone on live television, and told his supporters who were assaulting the Capitol to stop. He could have told them to stand down. He could have told them to go home. And he failed to do so. It's hard to imagine a more significant and more serious dereliction of duty than that.
Is his failure to make that statement criminal negligence?
You know, I think that there are a number of, as the chairman said, potential criminal statutes at issue here, but I think that there's absolutely no question that it was a dereliction of duty. And I think one of the things the committee needs to look at as we're looking at a legislative purpose is whether we need enhanced penalties for that kind of dereliction of duty. But I think it's also important for the American people to understand how dangerous Donald Trump was. We know as he was sitting there in the dining room next to the Oval Office, members of his staff were pleading with him to go on television, to tell people to stop. We know Leader McCarthy was pleading with him to do that. We know members of his family. We know his daughter. We have firsthand testimony that his daughter Ivanka went in at least twice to ask him to please stop this violence. Any man who would not do so, any man who would provoke a violent assault on the Capitol to stop the counting of electoral votes, any man who would watch television as police officers were being beaten, as his supporters were invading the Capitol of the United States, is clearly unfit for future office, clearly can never be anywhere near the Oval Office ever again.
Hillary Clinton said a couple of weeks ago that if he runs and wins, that could be the end of our democracy. Do you share that fear?
I do. I think it is critically important, given everything we know about the lines that he was willing to cross. He crossed lines no American president has ever crossed before.
This is Republican Liz Cheney taking aim at Trump as the January 6th committee continues its investigation into the events of the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. For one, she revealed that the committee now knows that Donald Trump was watching the events of January 6th unfold from a dining room in the White House, watching it on TV like it was an episode of Game of Thrones, which is especially damning considering he was the sole person who had the power to stop it. These were his supporters rioting on his orders. They were wearing his shirts, waving his flags, chanting his name, and they've already admitted that they were there on his behalf countless times in court. And yet the fact that he made the conscious decision not to call them off is tacit proof of the fact that he wanted them to be there. This was by design. You cannot argue that by choosing to kick back, relax, and watch the insurrection unfold on TV when he and he alone had the ability to stop it was anything other than clear-cut evidence that this is exactly what he wanted to happen. And of course, just to put one more right-wing lie to rest, it's now beyond clear that these were Trump supporters. And besides the clothing, besides the flags, besides the hats, besides the fact that they were acting on his orders, even more evident is the fact that every person close to Trump was begging him to appeal to his supporters to stand down.
According to the records, multiple Fox News hosts knew the president needed to act immediately. They texted Mr. Meadows, and he has turned over those texts. Quote, Mark, the president needs to tell people in the Capitol to go home. This is hurting all of us. He is destroying his legacy, Laura Ingraham wrote. Please get him on TV, destroying everything you have accomplished, Brian Kilmeade texted. Quote, can he make a statement? Ask people to leave the Capitol, Sean Hannity urged. As the violence continued, one of the president's sons texted Mr. Meadows, quote, he's got to condemn this shit ASAP. The Capitol Police tweet is not enough. Donald Trump Jr. texted. Meadows responded, quote, "I'm pushing it hard. I agree." Still, President Trump did not immediately act. Donald Trump Jr. texted again and again, urging action by the president. Quote, "We need an Oval Office address. He has to lead now. It has gone too far and gotten out of hand," end quote. But hours passed without necessary action by the president.
And just to be clear, these people would not be begging Trump to speak up if they weren't his own supporters. I'm pretty sure that if Antifa was rioting at the Capitol, Don Jr. would understand that they probably wouldn't be taking their cues from Trump. And by the way, just a note here, as Trump continues his assault on any Republicans who don't subscribe to his anti-democratic MAGA worldview, one person who bears significant responsibility is Mitch McConnell. McConnell had the opportunity to vote to impeach Trump and to whip the rest of his caucus in the Senate in favor of impeachment too. He chose not to, voting against it and then after the fact standing up to condemn Trump's behavior. This way he can get credit for the virtue signaling while ensuring that Trump bears no accountability whatsoever. And so not only did McConnell help the narrative that Trump didn't do anything worthy of punishment, but he left the door open for him to run again. Only now, Trump will likely run with a party emboldened to think that violence is an acceptable means of achieving their political ends. McConnell might pretend that he's part of some responsible establishment wing of the Republican Party, but he bears just as much responsibility as the fringe lunatics for enabling this despotic behavior. And look, I don't know what's going to happen to Trump. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a psychic. But I will say this. If there is no accountability for Trump, who so clearly incited this insurrection, then those responsible for failing to hold him accountable will also bear responsibility when it happens again. We are either a nation of laws or we're not. Donald Trump broke the law. He incited a murderous mob to break into the Capitol, a crime that resulted in over 700 people getting charged so far. You cannot argue that those people should be charged, and yet somehow the person who directed those people is innocent. If he's not held accountable, if overt attacks against our democracy aren't punished, then that might as well be permission for them to happen again. Our democracy isn't guaranteed, and if we don't fight for it, we will lose it. What happens next with regard to Donald Trump and January 6th is going to answer that question. Let's hope, for the sake of the future of this country, that those charged with holding him to account actually have the courage to do exactly that. To see more videos like this, click the subscribe button right here on this screen. And if you want to support my work, subscribe to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen. I cover the most important stories each week, and my guest is always one of the top political figures, including Vice President Kamala Harris, Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Pete Buttigieg, Nancy Pelosi, Katie Porter, Cory Booker, and so many more. The podcast link is also right here on this screen, so give it a listen and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.